안녕하십니까.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 7th Jeju Forum. It is my great pleasure to meet you. Let us begin the session under the title of Beyond Hate, Reflection and Solidarity Towards the Era of Coexistence. We are providing simultaneous interpretation both in Korean and English. If you need to use a service, please use the receiver on your table. Korea, channel number 1, English, channel number 2.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today for Beyond Hate, Reflections and Solidarity Towards the Era of Coexistence. Simultaneous interpretation is provided during the session. Please use the interpretation receiver that is placed at each seat. Channel 1 is for Korean, channel 2 is for English. 세션을 시작하기
Before we begin session, please allow me to invite Mr. Min Moo-soo, President of the Jeju Women and Family Research Institute. He will deliver the opening word. Please welcome with a big round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm President of Jeju Women and Family Research Institute. My name is Min Moo-soo. Hosted by my institution as well as Jeju Self-Governing Special Governance. It is my great honor to see the successful opening of it. Today's session, we're going to talk about the hate and conflict which is being spread across the globe and its possible implication on our society and the solution how to overcome such hate speech so that we can have some reflection and enhance solidarity towards the era of the coexistence. Because of the COVID-19 and the war in Ukraine, we realize that universal value or peace has been very much undermined, and the crises we thought of are actually a reality nowadays. Because of the COVID-19 prevailing COVID-19, women, the minorities, and the vulnerable groups have been subject to the persecution and hate speech, whose spread speed is as fast as the pandemic, and also the ghost of the Cold War once again haunted the European nation in the name of the war in Ukraine. So the hate speech is very much risky these days. However, the solution on it is still at the rudimentary level, I believe. Instead of choosing the coexistence, some chose to work towards the hate. And it is very difficult to live in a society where there is a hate speech because we are living in a multi-diverse society. So it is very much important for us to find a solution, and that is the minimum precondition for us to live in a society in a coexistent manner. So we're going to talk about many hate speech issues and phenomena so that we can find a solution altogether so that we can move towards the era of coexistence. Today's session, thank you so much for your participation for today's session. Dear keynote speech, Ambassador Maria Castillo Fernandez of EU delegation to the Korea. Thank you so much for your participation, as well as my special thanks go to Professor Kim Sok-ko, Professor Shin Eun-hwa, Chief Editorial Writer Kim Young-hee, Teacher Han Min-ho of Jeju Daejeong Middle School. Through today's session, I hope that we can remove the obstacles that prevent us going towards the era of coexistence, and I hope we can find a solution all together through today's session. Thank you so much. Then, I'd like to introduce the moderator of the session. The one who delivered the opening remark actually is the moderator of the session. President graduated from the Illinois University studying the education and then moved to the Ministry of Gender and Family and also worked for the Human and Gender Family Committee of the National Assembly and was the president of the Education Promotion Institute. She is the president of the Jeju Women and Family Research Institute to empower women on the Jeju Island. I'll deliver the microphone to the moderator. Thank you so much for your introduction. So today, my institute realized that the hate speech is prevailing in and outside of Korea, and we thought that we need to have this kind of opportunity to discuss the solution for those kind of hate speech. We thought that individual or single group should not be excluded in any cases, and that kind of hate move are very detrimental to the society we need to live in, and also it undermines the future leaders who need to live on this island, and also it undermines the value of the democracy in a very significant manner. This hate speech actually had happened in the past and is ongoing as well. Given that, I think that kind of hate speech has been continuously witnessed from the past up until today. Right to freedom or expression must be preserved. However, that kind of repetition of wrong information or false information, that kind of social level hate speech should be curbed, and that would be the main topic of today's session. We're gonna have multiple discussion on how to tackle those hate speech issues with the people with a background or knowledge in this field, so that we can find the ways for the coexistence. Actually, we invited the director of the gender equality policy of the Jeju self-governing special province. Please welcome with a big round of applause. Actually, and let me introduce the speakers and the discussant. The keynote speech will be delivered by Ambassador Maria Castillo Fernandez of EU delegation to the RK. Ambassador, before the dispatch, was the ambassador of the Malaysia and also was working for the EEAS in Brussels as well. And the second speaker is the Professor Kim Soko of Seoul National University. He received a PhD in sociology from the University of Chicago and is now working hard to build KSG, the Korea Specific Index from 2017. Based on this index, has been working for the implementation of the SDG for Korea. He is the director of the Society Development Promotion Institute of the Seoul National University. Let me introduce the discussant of the today's session. The first discussant is the Shin Eun-ha, assistant professor of the philosophy department of Jeju National University. He graduated from the Prinebrook University in Germany, and the area of expertise includes the humanitarian alienation in capitalistic society. The second discussant is Mr. Han Min-ok, teacher of the Jeju Daejeong Middle School student. He is the civil member of the first Human Rights Deliberation Committee for students and has been working hard to promote the peace in the Korean society. The final discussant is Kim Young-hee, chief editorial writer of Hangyeoldae. Kim Young-hee is the chief editorial writer of the Hangyeoldae and served as a cultural, social, and economic affair head editors, and also she covered multiple issues on the disabled people. So I'd like to give the floor to the keynote speaker, dear Maria Castillo Fernandez. Floor is yours.
큰 박수로 모시겠습니다.
Please welcome with a big round of applause.
안녕하십니까, and a big 감사합니다 to the Jeju forum.
Good morning. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Discrimination, human rights in the agenda, that we don't forget this very important agenda. We have been talking these 3 days a lot about peace, coexistence, big geopolitical and geoeconomic challenges, but also this element is so important. And I see Jeju always at the very front line in many of the key issues that are so important for us today, being climate, with your climate neutrality, being gender, and I'm very happy to see at Jeju Women and Family Institute of Research and so many prominent professors dealing with these issues. It's so important, and also peace. So all of these elements go together. There is no way you can separate them. And today, one of the issues which is certainly, the dark side all the good things that digital, technological, and innovation bring is how we tackle hatred. And this is also part also, as President Min very well mentioned, is certainly a breeding ground for violence and conflict. We have seen that when we have made the effort to go crisis after crisis, the pandemic, now the Russians' unjustified invasion of Ukraine, which has a lot of spill effects, including in this area of hatred. We have witnessed, a lot of scapegoating, xenophobia, hate speech, online, offline, but only mainly to minorities, to vulnerable and marginal groups. And that, of course, includes women, includes disabled, older people, LGBT, and migrants. Russia has also, and I have to mention, because this is, whatever we have been discussing today, this invasion of Ukraine has, as I said in another panel, and Ban Ki-moon mentioned it also yesterday, it's a flagrant violation of international law, but it also has repercussions in human rights. Look how the humanitarian law is being just shattered in the war, and how the human rights of the people, of prisoners, are not taken into account. But it has also fomented hatred against and dehumanizing the Ukrainian people as a tool of war. So all this together, we are pushing tolerance, we are pushing non-discrimination as the foundations of human dialogue, as the foundations of human dignity, of peace, and we are confronted with so many obstacles. And I imagine today you are going to see how we can find, as President Min said, a way to a better coexistence. In Korea, where there is a widespread hate speech online and offline. Hateful comments are frequently seen across various online platforms, spurred perhaps by a systematic discrimination, which is rooted very much in society, and increased socioeconomic polarization, where vulnerable groups, as I mentioned before, are certainly falling victims of pent-in frustration. In 2016, we all know a young woman fell victim to murder at Gangnam Station, and the male suspect explained that he hated women for belittling him. We have seen also in 2018 the asylum seekers in Yemen that applied for refugee status in Jeju, and there was a lot of hate speech directed towards Muslim and refugees. We have seen also in the general election how much the gender gap on the woman and male in very younger generation was also part of this, and this is a big concern. I attended last July, and I see the New Zealand ambassador who was also there with me, the queer cultural festivals, and the one that was celebrated in City Hall. And Felipe and me were speaking about this just over lunch. So we remember how much hatred was, surrounded us by groups who were demonstrating at the same time. But there was so much hatred speech in that moment that it is concerning. But that doesn't mean that in other parts in Europe there is also, and in New Zealand, I imagine, Philippe, that as well. So it's an overall. In Europe, we witness a number of horrendous cases of hate speech that lead to lynching and even killing of persons who express freely their views and ask for their exercise of freedom of religion or belief. So what do we do? What can we do together? We are very committed to tackle and step up action to tackle hate speech at national and international levels. We have laws that require our EU countries to criminalize racist and xenophobia incitement to violence or hatred against a person or a group of persons simply because of their ethnicity, religion, or nationality. We have a 2008 EU framework combating certain forms of expression of racism and xenophobia, which requires the criminalization of public incitement to violence. We have an action plan until 2025, an anti-racism action plan, which sets a series of measures to tackle and set up action to bring together all levels of actors to address racism more effectively. And last year, we adopted a communication, which we hope will become one day a decision of law, to extend the current list of EU crimes to hate crimes and hate speech. And this is important because this list is in our European treaties, so like our constitution in Europe. So if we manage, we then be able also to propose secondary legislation on how we define criminal offenses and penalties for hate speech and hate crime in the European Union. Apart from that, you also need platforms. You know, we have a voluntary code of conduct to address the online hate speech with big companies, Facebook, Microsoft, Google, YouTube, Twitter, to ensure that they can review and remove illegal hate speech. And we have expanded that to new companies as well. Last but not least, we are all here part of the treaties, the UN treaties, the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, the UN Convention of Human Rights, and those non-discrimination is really at the heart also of those rights that both Korea, Europe, and the world, all the UN members are part of. So sometimes we have the laws, but that it seems not to be enough because we still have hatred in our societies. What is important is that we continue to put this high in the agendas, that we raise awareness, and that is, I think, what the Jeju President Min, you are doing through the Jeju Women Institute. This is very important. We shouldn't put this down on the agenda. It should be up in the agendas. Continue to work together to stand up against crime and all forms of discrimination. Ready to share good practice, and I think that is what we intend. Today's session, Beyond Hate, is a good way to bring also gender in, to bring non-discrimination agenda in, because gender is about male and woman. I always say it's not only a woman issue. We need to speak with both. We need to both understand, both to be together in this discussion. And we need a whole society approach. You mentioned, we need to tackling hate is a shared responsibility, dear friends. The government, political leaders, think tanks, civil society, media, and I see that there is some people here from the media, has a crucial role to play towards working for more tolerant and more inclusive societies. And as President Min said, solutions are still very rudimentary. We need to step up that work and find solutions to a better coexistence. Certainly, Europe is willing to partner with Korea, to work on that direction, and to local governance and local communities, because you are at the forefront of what is happening. You feel it. People come and speak to you. You know about so many cases that don't come in the press, that don't go out. So you can feel what is the sentiment and how is the situation much more better than us diplomats or governments. So we need you very much to be there and to serve as a bridge and a channel, where at the same time you can help people and you can try to find solutions on that basis. Thank you very much, Kansamida.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your remarks. And indeed, she talked about how to eradicate hate speech in Europe, and she talked about legislative efforts in the EU as well. So among the topics what is interesting is that if you look at the EU crimes list, you can find hatred speeches and hatred expressions. And going forward, to eradicate the widespread of hate speech and hate expressions online, so in 2017, the code of conduct was created for online platforms and businesses. And she also talked about its progress and its effectiveness. And last but not least, she talked about discussed hatred, and to tackle these issues, the government leaders, the media, local government, civil society, all stakeholders should work together and should be committed. This is what she covered. Then I'd like to introduce the next speaker for his presentation. Professor Seok Kim will deliver his presentation under the theme of Beyond Conflict, Recognition and Coexistence Between Genders from the Perspective of Future Generations.
안녕하세요.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. As have been introduced, I'm Professor Seok Kim of Seoul National University, Social Development Department. Recently, you can see hatred and conflict in the world, so I believe this session is being held in a timely manner, and I'm so honored to have this opportunity to talk about this. I'm going to talk about what I have studied and researched. I thought I will be given 10 minutes, but I guess I have 12 minutes, so I have 2 more minutes. But my PPT slides include 40 slides, so I'm going to skip some slides, so please understand it. So, Beyond Conflict, Recognition and Coexistence Between Genders from the Perspective of Future Generations. This is title. Rather than using the term youth, I use the term future generations. So there are a simple reason why I'm using future generations. Indeed, Edward Page firstly introduced the concept of future generations. It means that future generations are people who will exist in the future where currently living people will not exist. And future generations include children at this moment and future children who are not yet born. And based on what I researched and studied, we should apply the term future generations to our youth. And I believe we can in Korea as well, because the core essence of the concept of future generations is this: those who are not yet born and their fate will be depending on and will be decided by decisions made by people living in today. So indeed, when those people are born, then regardless of their commitment and efforts, their fates are already decided. But when talking about Korean youth problems, some same characteristics can be observed when it comes to society, economy, and politics. Political power and resources in the Korean society are not owned by our future generations and youth, but indeed because of and decisions made by groups with resources and power can make and can decide future generations' fate and destiny. So that's why I believe we can use the term future generations to talk about our youth. So I'm going to use the term future generations, and also I'm going to use the term youth interchangeably. Indeed, future generations and youth in Korea are facing these issues. You can see challenges from individual levels to planetary levels. You can find a variety of pressures and changes in the environment. They are exposed to those risks. But of course, we cannot map the Korean society in detail. But regarding conflict or hatred in the society, if you look at the block, then you can find some battlefront, including gender, class, region, and generation. So hatred, conflict, coexistence, solidarity, issues regarding them are exposed because of those fragmented battlefronts. So, some core parts are divided, and those issues are facing all of us at the same time. And these issues are in particular affecting our future generations. But if you look at the Korean society, when talking about future generations and youth, we usually talk about gender conflicts. So conflicts between our future generations are very severe and serious. In particular, hatred between male and female are quite serious. In my opinion, it is accepted as a common knowledge, but we do not have enough evidence. Also, they have some commonalities as well as differences. But gender conflicts have been exaggerated and reproduced. And under such circumstance, social members should create some values that they can agree to, but it's hard to do. It is quite regretful. So for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to cover challenges facing male and female youth, as well as issues and differences and commonalities between their opinions. So for coexistence and solidarity, not for conflict and hatred, I'm going to talk about some discourses. I will skip some slides. Let's see how different they are. You can see statistics in 2016 and last year. Indeed, you can, if you look at the two former ones, so you can see the sentence, usually male population, men are main breadwinner, and second one is women put more importance on their career before childcaring. But there is almost no difference between male and female in those two fields. But if you look at some situations at work, for example, work for male and female at work are different. And violence against women in Korea is quite serious. In these two issues and fields, there are some differences in opinions between male and female future generations and youth. You can see the difference. And you can see a star between the graph. And you can see 3 graphs, bars. You can find, and those 3 graphs represent male population in their 20s and 30s and female population in 20s, 30s and those in 50s. And the star shows there is a significant difference between men and women in their 20s and 30s. And between male in their 20s, 30s and female in 20s, 30s have shown some significant difference in issues regarding feminism and gender inequality. So please refer to some my materials, and these are contents from the interview I had, and these are quite interesting. Of course, not everything is different, but in specific issues we can see clear differences, and we need to look at why they hate each other. And I'm going to talk about 2 points. First, there is a index for survey called gender discrimination, and I brought about ambivalent gender discrimination. And as you can see, ambivalent gender discrimination shows some coexistence between hostile and benevolent discrimination. But if you look at benevolent and hostile discrimination, it shows some hostility between male and female, and you can see some gender discrimination between some warmth and it shows people show some protective measures when it comes to emotions and relationships. And you can see a significant difference between male and female when it comes to ambivalent gender discrimination. But when it comes to benevolent discrimination, there's almost no difference between male and female. So you can find some commonalities at the same time differences. And I brought another indices. It is dehumanization. And regarding feminists, I analyzed dehumanization indices. If you look at these graphs, male population in their 20s are totally located differently. And regarding feminism, female in 20s have almost no rejections. But if you look at some male population in their 20s, you can see some people showing rejection regarding feminists. So I'd like to say this: they are different, but at the same time, they are the same. So if you look at the graph, almost all areas, you can see almost no difference. In society, in the Korean society, to be successful, people have different opinions when it comes to success. And let's look at income gaps. I asked the question, is income gap between the two groups unfair? And we were able to see that when it comes to this issue, there is a clear difference between men and women. But as you can see on this graph, regarding fairness of distribution or regarding fairness of welfare, men and women have almost no difference because they are important for the society. And other than gender issues, men and women had shown no difference. And what is important in this graph is that there's almost no difference, but what is important is that depending on class and depending on how much resources you have, people have different recognitions. There's no change depending on gender or depending on gender. Please give me one more minute. Gender equality has been emphasized in our society, and while emphasizing that, social inequalities or different recognition coming from different class have been hidden. I'm going to skip it. And let me touch upon this. And this is one more regretful time. Indeed, men and women have come into conflict, but those future generations do not have resources because they are so-called the inferior. So the fight is being waged between the inferiors. But the older generations have had almost all resources. So future generations and youth have some hostile sentiment against the older generations. And transfer of power and resources should be the one issue that we need to think about. But gender issues have been continuously emphasized, thus hindering the discussion of constructive topics. So it shows how negative our future generations and youth are feeling toward our older generations. And also, the interview content showed how to change the society. So in closing, it shows that rather than gender, it is about class and leather. So regarding the future, our future generations have different thinkings because our future generations and youth do not think that they have a bright future, and this is all about the distribution of resources. And last but not least, considering all these factors aforementioned, to decide their future and to decide the quality of their lives, we believe, according to some results of studies, you can see the center of the slide, we should give them opportunities and freedom so that they can make their own decisions for their lives. So it should be expanded. At the same time, we need to make sure to make their lives better. If we keep emphasizing this going forward, then we will not be able to create a healthy discourse. Thank you very much for your information. Thank you.
So the speaker just shared the outcomes of his studies to talk about the different aspects of the hate speech. in terms of the ethnicity and the social groups. So you have listened to the presentation, and I will invite three discussants. Mr. Kim shared the statistic information. Now let's change the topic because Professor Shin is going to talk about something about the philosophy. Please, the floor is yours.
안녕하세요.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm majoring in social philosophy at Jeju National University. I'm Eunhwa Shin. You can refer to my paper from the booklet as I have been introduced. The discussant can make remarks while taking seats, while sitting. So I'm going to make my remarks while I'm taking seats. So I wrote my paper that saying that we are going to re-ask philosophy in the era of hatred. And currently we are talking a lot about hatred. But we need to think about whether such hatred and disgust are something new that didn't exist before. But in history, if you look at history, disgust, hatred have been existing. And we are talking about the era of hatred, but talking about that era itself is that it is showing people's recognition of hatred. So we are not creating something new. And I believe we are having some perspectives and views regarding the problems that had existed before. And I'm going to talk about disgust, defined by Nussbaum, who is a philosopher, and I usually agree to Nussbaum. And Nussbaum distinguished hatred into disgust toward primary objects and projective disgust. And disgust makes us puke, and disgust is all about protecting ourselves from harmful elements. That is our reflection. So some materials that could make us puke or make us sick could be something dirty. So if you are scared of being infected, then you can naturally show disgust to protect yourself. But this is not the end. And regarding disgust toward primary object, Nussbaum didn't deny. But something dirty or something harmful, or if something causes animality, and if you project those characteristics into people so that you can regard people as pathogens, that would be a huge problem. This is pointed out by Nussbaum. He showed some criticism regarding disgust, and as a philosophy major, I totally agree with his opinion. But there are some people who advocate hatred called deviling, and he said, through hatred we can detect vices, and depending on the criteria, we can ban vices through legal frameworks. So that's why hatred is very useful emotion, and this is his suggestion. And also a philosopher called Kass also mentioned that some sins should be dealt with our wisdom, so that sins can be detected and we can put it far away with our wisdom. And also another philosopher, Haidt, who is a moral psychologist, talked about we need to detect what we should be away from. So hatred is a very useful emotion. This is what he said as well. But if you think about those advocacies, and if you ask a question whether we should accept such hatred or not, then I believe we should not take for granted that we shouldn't have a hatred. And Nussbaum talked about disgust toward primary objects and projective disgust, and just like such distinction, it is not based on dirtiness, it is based on some projection, and this is what Nussbaum said. And without any basis or evidence, you could make estimations or assumptions toward some groups. And we need to ask ourselves whether we project some dirty things into people. And it is not about our responsibility, but based on race or gender, or based on whether people have disabilities or not. Some people think of others not people. They regard people as some pathogens. And we need to think about whether such ideas are reasonable and rational or not. And Professor Soko Kim mentioned before, he talked about dehumanization in his presentation. And as for people, of course, we have many characteristics. Those could be dirty, or sometimes we may have germs inside our body. But some harmfulness, if you project such harmfulness and dirtiness into people, it could cause a problem. And sometimes we use terms like some bug, and we have some hatred expressions using the term for bug or dirty. We need to think about we, without notice, project some dirty things into people. And everyone has their own defects, but sometimes people discriminate others, and sometimes people have some discriminatory opinions regarding others, and we need to think about whether we are deserving or not. But I don't think we have the right to do. But anyway, in closing, what should we do? We need to ask what we should do. And Nussbaum suggested this. We are very weak, and we are imperfect, and we need to accept that fact humbly. That is the one that matters. And we need to think about others' opinions, and we need to put ourselves into others' shoes. And we should be committed to relating to others and understanding others. And as a philosophy scholar, the characteristics and issues of hatred or disgust, I believe it should be analyzed in the perspective of other areas. We need to reflect ourselves. And while preparing for this discussion, I thought about Locke, who talked a lot about the equality in the social ladder, and I was quite surprised. And people living that time might face more challenges. They talked about all people are equal and same, but they must have experienced some hatred speeches and hatred from others. But if you consider the difficulties faced philosophers in the past, then I believe we will be able to go forward in the future. Thank you very much.
철학적인
So that was quite a philosophical interpretation of the hate speech, the basic instinct of the human nature and perception of the human being were discussed. But before we move on to the next, we have ambassador of Rwanda to Korea, Dalia Yasmin. Ambassador is here. Please welcome with a big round of applause, please. Thank you so much for your participation. Then I'd like to invite the second discussant, Mr. Han Min-ho, is going to talk about the perception and hate speech of the youngsters in classroom. This is quite serious these days. The floor is yours. And actually, we are behind the schedule, so please be concise and be on time. Hello, everyone. I'm teaching sociology. My name is Han Min-ho. To begin with, I feel suffocated because I'm too frustrated because my family is there. So that my daughter and my wife. So I'm kind of being empowered. So I'm still very much frustrated, but I'll do my best to speak as I prepare it. So please refer to the slide as I'm speaking about my discussion. I'm not able to see the screen because I have another screen before me, so please don't worry about me. So beginning from last year, I try to teach hate speech in my class as much as I can. The picture on the slide is the picture I took with a picket with my student. Quite fabulous. So I always work with my children to fight hate speech in my class. This year, likewise, we taught a lot about hate speech in my class. I had a curiosity what kind of perception they have about the hate speech in case of my student. Human Rights Council in 2019 actually did a survey for the general public, and I also did a survey for 104 students in my school, and the outcome is here. So you can understand that the hate speech is very much going on in the classroom as well. So I confirmed that hate speech is everywhere in classroom. But before I do the survey, like this Jamboard, we did some kind of practical activities because we don't really know much about the hate speech. We confirmed what kind of hate speech are there in our daily life. So we did kind of brainstorming to see what kind of hate speech is being used in our life or around us and how those words make you feel. So I let them to express their ideas and thoughts and emotions and made a word cloud. And as this word cloud suggests, when they hear about the hate speech, it weighs heavily on their mind and it deteriorates the atmosphere in the classroom. And considering the outcome of the survey, I realized that the situation is more serious than I expected. So I struggled. What do I need to do to remove the hate speech from the classroom and how I can make a classroom capable of fight against the hate speech? So based on such concern, I realized that all the hate speech I experienced in classroom and all the responses and difficulties we face in the classroom should be shared. So I'm going to share that. For example, misogyny. Personally, in classroom, I felt that the gender issue is so serious. If there is a female teacher and male student, you can understand that age is quite different between the two sides, but that age does not matter. Gender rather matters when it comes to hate speech. If you see my paper, you can understand the anecdote of a teacher that was quite serious. That teacher need to have kind of mental consultation because the suffering was too enormous for her. So we had some kind of teachers authority protection committee to have a consultation. So we decided to protect her by isolating her from the student, and we gave kind of disciplinary measure against that specific student. So we did our best to protect the teacher, but that student did repeated the misogynic attitude to another teacher. So the committee was once again convened to my tragedy. Another example was that one male student took a picture of a female student and made quite an obscene picture. And of course, the male student apologized, but victim had to face another message from that attacker, kind of joking about what he did to her. Also, another example of the gender conflict between male and female student. They were friends from the elementary school days, but the female student said to male student that, "Are you going to watch this YouTuber again and again? If you do this, I'm not gonna see you again because this YouTuber is too misogynic." But that male student later told to his friends that I watched this YouTube and that lady said she don't want to see me at all again. And that lady was walking along the line, and many students joke her that she's extreme feminist, and that feminist is here. So of course, that male student apologized, but that tells how serious the gender conflict is. Next example is the social network case. There are many violence going on through social network, but existing policies or structures are not enough to solve this kind of issues. Please refer to my paper if you want to know about the details of these examples. So these many examples have been shared and responded by the faculty. We have our own committees and members of the association, but the situation is too difficult to handle. Also, the Human Rights Council from last year produced a paper and did a workshop to talk about the gender issues. And I took the opportunity to have the kind of workshop in my class, and I shared many things with my students to respond to hate speech within the classroom. Still, there are so many difficulties. To begin with, parents really are not incentivized, even they opposed to those kind of education in classroom. In fact, they voice that they want to get that kind of education, and that is quite discouragement for teachers like me. And when teacher become a victim of hate speech, they realize what they feel and they understand what kind of emotion they have. However, it is very difficult for them to properly respond to hate speech when they become a victim. In the case, we need to have the kind of some kind of education for general public or student to teach them how to respond to hate speech when they face it. But unfortunately, the Ministry of Education and affiliated education failed to revise the educational decree, and they even integrated the gender education system with the sports education system. And if that's the case, we will not be able to provide a proper education to our student. And it will be very difficult for us to help our students properly respond to hate speech. So that kind of concern, I hope need to share it through this kind of occasion. Lastly, if you see this slide, this kind of human rights education must be reinforced, I believe, and this slide suggests that it is of necessary. We did a role play to understand what kind of hate speech they have and what kind of feeling they might have, and these are impressions they shared through the role play. They understood what they feel when they become a victim, and they realized that they need to actively fight the hate speech they shared. And these impression tells that this kind of education is something of very much necessity, and we can change although gradually. So this concludes my discussion for this session. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your ideas.
Thank you very much. You just shared very vivid experiences on site, on school. So your cases make us feel like we are in a classroom. Thank you very much anyway for your presentation. So students are using hatred speeches and expressions. It's quite regretful. And it's a pity. We need to, and I totally agree with that, we need perseverance as well. And next I'm going to introduce Chief Editorial Writer Young-hee Kim of 한겨레. She's going to talk about the media coverage.
안녕하세요. 저는
Hello everyone, I'm from 한겨레 Daily Newspaper. I'm the chief editorial writer Kim Young-hee. Chief editorial writer usually play a role in writing column. So we are in charge of writing column, and most of them are kind of the older population. So we write some kind of editorial that talks about the stance of a certain issue. So that's why I write a lot of columns. Actually, my area of interest includes sociology, gender equality, and I do have interest in it as still. It's my great honor to be part of this panelist member, and so delighted to be invited. And I realized that everything is about the media. I felt that the blame is on media always, because it is very difficult to understand and be in other shoes, but you can be in other shoes through the power of journalism. I do agree with that. There are so much hate speech going on in the social network, and actually journalists kind of disseminated those kind of false information. Many criticize, and I agree with it. When journalist members gathers, we always tell that we should not quote what is being said on social network. We always said, but we still do in many cases. So if you see my paper, you will understand why that kind of structure changes has not taken place. Of course, you might see it as an excuse, but anyway, I did my explanation. So let me share some of the explanation. So I told you that the journalist is part of to be blamed, and someone even called the journalist a trash, and I feel sometimes powerless, but I do believe that one of the power of the journalist is framing, because they can create a frame whenever issue comes out. Maybe 2 days ago, we had a tragedy in the Shindang station. I think you're familiar with the news already, the murder case. And when I joined our internal network, internal system, we decided not to use the term retaliation. This is just stalking murder. We disseminate this information to every journalist members, and actually they understood why retaliation should not be used. So that kind of lens must be properly selected from the hands of the journalists before we cover a story. But before 2006, before we cover the Gangnam Station murder case, we were not very sensitive to the importance of the words selection. We had a murder case because of the domestic violence and many other cases, but we thought that those are just individual cases, tragic individual cases. But the Gangnam case was different because the woman saw it and felt the kind of fear, collective fear. And as a woman, when I first heard the news, I realized that that sentiment and that condolences should be interpreted in a new manner, and that was a very difficult job, to tell the truth. And we realized that the digital sexual violence, we knew that it was there, but we didn't realize that how they created the fear among younger female. And I didn't realize the perception or disagreement or anger of the men in the 20s. I was the chief and editor in the social affairs, but that was very new to me. So that 2006 event was kind of a watershed moment for journalist people. But too many coverage really occupied with gender issues back then too much, so we were not able to properly see the multiple aspects of the event to tell the truth, because it is our nature to always look into the conflict first rather than non-conflict aspect of the event. I don't have much time, but recently the journalists are repeating those kind of attitudes again and again. In 1993, when I first joined the media, we always had to read the foreign media first. We didn't have internet connection. We had to use the paper to listen to the news outside of Korea. But the situation is totally different nowadays. And for the journalists, the world has changed totally. And of course, now we can share all the information. Everyone can have access to information, but that's not the case in some cases. Also, Korean journalists failed to find a proper subscription model. So the only revenue stream is the portal news or internet search platform. So when the event happens, journalists are so much occupied with writing an article faster than the others to earn that revenue stream. So we are one of the latecomers always in every news coverage. So whenever we talk about the digital news, many journalists think that, okay, I'll write any cherish and later I will edit it. But they fail to realize that once they are spread, they spread so fast. For example, when I covered the Inade University news, one witness talk about what it happened, and that was the first news. But within 30 minutes, every journalist quoted that words and spread it just within the time of 30 minutes. But we always said that we corrected the news in any cases, but that correction does not seem right to the public still. So of course we made a mistake, so I have no excuse for it. But like I said before, actually Even if we spend too many times and effort to write a very good article, the view clicks are still very small. So sometimes we tend to write something fast and rapidly instead of writing something well organized manner. So some other besides 한겨레 and 경향, other media outlets even have a contract journalist who write those kind of sentimental and yellow paper style rapid articles. So many people are criticizing. Of course, those media outlets produce outstanding articles, but those consume too many time and effort, so they rather not to do it. Yellow journalism and non-yellow journalism had a certain clear distinction in the past, but now the distinction between the two is quite blurred, I should say. So that is one issue I want to raise. Also, I wanted to use the term controversial journalism because Korea outlets usually do not cover anything. Instead, they just quote what other people are saying just for the sake of the speed. So social bipolarization or because of other issues, I believe that the journalists are kind of disencouraged because in case of the archery athlete Ansan, he had an issue of the feminism, extreme feminism, but the opinion or coverage between domestic journalists and overseas journalists were so much different because domestic journalists usually have too much fear of getting criticized, especially when the issue is about the human right or basic democratic value. Because in the Korean society, over the last few years, the issue has been too politicized. The hate speech become too politicized. Even if you see the recent case of the disabled people's demonstration, those are too much politicized. So for journalists, it is very burdensome to write an article because we might seen as too much politicized. I don't think that that's a case of the Hungary, but that is a usually case of the other media outlet. So I would call it the controversial journalism. And newsrooms are also dominated by the male people in their 50s. Things are changing, but too slow. So there are so many young female journalists, but there were too many old male journalists as well in the media outlet. Besides, youngsters usually use internet news, but the older generation usually buy the paper news. So there should be some perception difference between the elder generation and younger generation. Since I spent too much time, I'll close here. Please refer to my paper for my conclusion. Everything's are summarized in my paper. One thing I'd like to say at the last is that I do understand that there is a criticism against the journalists. I do understand that. But if you want a quality coverage, please look closer to us. Please separate those who are doing good job and for those who are not doing the good job so that we can continue to work harder for making change within the journalist community.
Thank you very much. I'm so sorry for not being able to give enough time to each speaker and panelist. So she talked about the issues regarding the media, and she also made some recommendations and suggestions and proposals for the civil society. And we have many distinguished guests on the floor. So if there is any question from the floor, I will going to receive one or two from the floor. Any questions from the floor? If you have questions, then please raise your hand and our staff member will hand over the microphone. Then please state your name and your affiliation.
Yeah, thank you so much for this wonderful session. My name is Frank Möhring. I'm from the Yonsei University. I'm a PhD student, and I'm researching on peace educational norms. So I especially want to ask my question to the teacher Han Min-ho. I really like your engagement, and I'm very fond of the engagement you have against hate speech. and your presentation as well. I was wondering if today the topic is also about the gender issues, but if you also have some background or some knowledge of the national related hate, whether that is also reflected within your class, especially, of course, China and Japan, which are close by, whether this also affects the hate speech or is this part of hate speech? Thank you.
네, 그 질문을 마저 또 받고 한 번만 더 받고 답변을 했으면 합니다. 혹시 더 질문하실 분 한 분 정도 더 있으실까요? 뭐 질문하실 분이 굉장히 많으시네요. 네, 뒤에 손 드신 네, 저기 앞에 마이크.
Please deliver the mic. Oh, you can go to the microphone if you want to ask a question.
Mason Ritchie, I'm a professor at Hankook University of Foreign Studies. I have a question, I guess really for Koreans who are on the panel, but obviously if Ambassador Castillo Fernandez wants to jump in, she's welcome to. And that is a two-part question. The first part is, why have we not seen the Progressive Party, when they had both the presidency and the National Assembly under their control, pass the National Human Rights Law, which has been in the National Assembly for a long time? If this is your progressive government and they can't pass that, that's stunning and shameful. And my second question is, when is that going to change? And that's especially, I think, for the Koreans. Like, are we working on this? Is there some progress that's happening here? Under what conditions can that happen? Thank you.
네, 매우 어려운 질문을 해주신 것 같습니다.
Thank you very much. It's a quite difficult question to give an answer due to time constraint. I believe we have more questions from the floor, but I will take only 2 questions from the floor due to the time constraint.
네, 시간이 없어가지고.
We do not have enough time, Madam Ambassador, so sorry. So, Teacher Han, please go ahead. So, as far as I understand from interpretation, in school, regarding gender, many hatred speeches are exposed and detected. But as I mentioned before, among the survey I mentioned before, some students have used hatred expressions toward regarding gender, and the highest field is stereotypes of male and female. You should be a man, you should be the woman. So regarding prejudices, there have been most hatred speeches and expressions. And regarding among many fields, there is a field called feminist. And freshman of a middle school student, and some student asked, what is a feminist? What is feminist? So I was really being cautious, and until the result, I thought the number would be low. But regarding North Korean defectors or immigrators, compared to them, more students experienced some hatred speeches regarding gender and feminist, and I believe that's because of the internet. And currently I'm teaching a freshman of a middle school, but I believe that's why still stereotypes and prejudices among men and women are the major issues.
For the second question about the anti-discrimination law that should have been passed, and what do we need to do to pass this kind of law? Maybe we can listen from Mr. Kim. Actually, that is too heavy question for me as well, but one thing that I need to clarify is that anti-discrimination law or human rights law, when I narrow down the scope to it, progressive, I don't know. I don't think that the opposition party is necessarily progressive. However, they are relatively progressive. But your question was that why the law failed to be passed in the past when they ruled the party. That is the truth. Human rights is the basic rights of human beings, and I believe that that did not kind of define whether someone is progressive or not. Of course, a human rights issue was raised during the previous term when the ruling party was progressive, but that kind of human rights law effort has been made whether the leadership is progressive or not, actually, to tell the truth. So I don't think that any progressive party would go faster or slower in terms of human rights law, because if I see the Korean society, that progressiveness has nothing to do with the effort of the human rights, personally, I believe. So I think that is something I need to clarify first. But to answer to a question, I believe that this is a problem of the democracy of the Korean society, because you said that if the party is progressive, it is clear for the party to pass more law about the human rights, you might think. However, that is not necessarily not the truth. Whether it is a human rights issue or not, still the parties need to talk with every parties through conflict sometimes, or controversy, or even competition sometimes, whether it is human law or any other law. That kind of law-making process in the Korean society is not very much democratic in many cases, I should say. So when there is a law raised at the National Assembly, that specific law should be sophisticatedly designed, and if that law has that kind of sophisticated foundation, it can easily pass. But usually the law is passed like in a top-down manner. For example, the National Assemblyman raised a bill, and if he has a great power, it can easily it can be easily passed as a National Assembly. So whether it is progressive or not, that has nothing to do with the passing of the human right law. So I think we need to change the frame. This is a problem of the kind of democratic system of Korea, I should say. So if something is very controversial or very sensitive, okay, I understand. We need to understand whether our system is democratic enough and our legislation or lawmaking process are democratic enough to even enough to understand the controversies or even embrace disagreement, or whether it can produce any law that can be appealed even to those who are opposed to that specific law. So this is about the quality of democratic system of Korea, I should say. Thank you.
예.
Thank you very much for sharing your ideas. I guess we do not have enough time to give enough and detailed answers since those issues are sensitive and they require a lot of time for discussion. So, if I may, I'd like to ask Madam Ambassador to talk about not just in the EU, but also in European countries. I believe hatred speeches and hatred crimes, to address them, I believe you have made a lot of legislation efforts. So if you have any comments to help Korea, then please share them.
I mean, a very, very interesting discussion here. In Europe, you have the laws. In Korea, you don't have yet the discrimination law, and I agree with you that at the end, it's not an issue of progressive, conservative. The whole society needs to be prepared, and there should be people really willing to move this forward. And we have been working a lot on the Human Rights Commission in Korea to work together on non-discrimination, pushing it as well. But what is important here, even if you have the laws, President Min, you also need the society and the mindset, because a lot of this depends also on education. That's why it's so important what Mr. Han says. You know, it's so serious. Look at what happened in the class, in the schools here. And we see that also in Europe. It's so important that all of us work together, family. You know, if you want to change cultural mindset, and this is a big issue here in Korea, big economic development, society going slower in the change because of your very strict Confucian system you had for many, many, many years, and that changes is much more difficult. Then what? You know, education, it's key, but education at home as well. You know, slowly put in the minds of younger generations, the future generations you were speaking as well, that there is another set of principles of tolerance, of coexistence, and that is important. That is something that in Europe, in schools, you also have a lot of education on ethics, education on human rights, education on tolerance, and that is very important. And also family, parents, we all have responsibilities as citizens, you know, to try also to raise awareness and try also to tell our children, you know, that there's no need to discriminate between male and female. I mean, I have 3 children. I have a boy and 2 girls. The boy is the small one. My boy and my girls don't feel that discrimination in the way of life, but I had felt it when I was at home. So I think we have a lot to do at all levels, and this is a whole, as I say, a whole society. What I meant by media is that we all have to work with you, because of course I agree with you, there are very good journalists here as well. Less females, that's what we found as well, mainly in the younger generation. Hope that will come up. But there is a lot of work to do together, and bring everyone together, and that's the most important. Thank you.
네, 대사님 감사.
Thank you so much for your comment, Ambassador. So we have 3 minutes left. Maybe among panelist members, if you want to add anything more, I can give you like 1 minute to each. Professor Shin, maybe you can go first. So at the beginning in my presentation or discussion, I told you that hate speech prevails. However, our kind of sentiment or sensitivity to hate speech has changed as well. So in the past, we were not sensitive, but now we are sensitive. That change itself is very promising, I believe, at least. So I don't think that the hate speech increased in this period of time. Maybe we became more kind of sensitive to hate speech and now realize that something are hate speech. And that kind of greater sensitivity will help us to fight the hate speech going forward.
맞는 말씀인 것 같아요.
Thank you very much for sharing your comments. And Chief Editorial Writer Kim, since you didn't have enough time to deliver your opinions, and I have similar ideas and opinions with Professor Shin. In the past, the media thought we learned that we should be half step ahead of people, but now we are just following 1 step or a half step behind people, and we were not sensitive to many issues, but now the media has changed it at all. And Madam Ambassador talked about women journalists as well, and I believe increasing number of female journalists has made huge contributions to changing sentiment and sensitivity. Of course, internally we may have some conflicts, but movement is going on. We do not have yet answers, but we are in progress. So with citizens, I believe we will be able to deliver more great coverage. Thank you very much.
Okay, 1 minute. So actually, we listened to the 2 presentation and we listened to the ideas of the 3 discussion to understand what kind of effort has been made in our society. Actually, the talk on hate speech is difficult and takes long time to be solved, and sometimes it is very kind of tiring and cause fatigue. But we always identify facts and evidences to fight hate speech. Otherwise, ourselves would be very false as well because we disseminate false information. If that becomes a mainstream, those who are trying to abide by the truth will be isolated within the society, and that isolation creates a fear, and many people, more and more people, will remain silent. So that kind of discussion should take place continuously, and that kind of discussion should continue again and again. So I believe that today's occasion was quite meaningful and informative and insightful. So the title was Beyond Hate, Reflection and Solidarity Towards the Area of Coexistence. Thank you so much for your presentation. And why don't we give another big round of applause to the 5 panelist members. Also, I'd like to give my big applause to the audience as well. Thank you so much for your participation.
이것으로
With this, we'd like to conclude the session. We are going to have a break from now on and resume the next session. Your participation would be very much appreciated. Thank you very much.